Întrebarea mea este legată de scutul antirachete pe care NATO a decis să-l desfășoare în România și în Polonia. După câte știm, Rusia este împotriva acestei acțiuni a Alianței North Atlanticse. Întrebarea mea este în felul următor. Ce argumente poate să aducă NATO în relația sale cu Federația Rusă pentru a detecționa eventuale, crize care putea să apară în relația NATO-Federația Rusă, în cazul în care NATO, eventual, dar NATO va continua, în mod sigur, desfășurarea acestui discutate de rachete în România și în Polonia, deoarece o eventuală, cum am spus eu, tensionare relațiilor ar putea să aibă și repercusiuni negative a situației din Republica Moldova. Da, mulțumesc.
Thank you. Next question.
Thank you, Ambassador. My name is Yuri Ospataran. I'm one of the co-founder of NATO Center in Chisinau. I have some background on working with NATO. And I would like to refer a little bit, if you can elaborate on the quality of Moldovan NATO cooperation, which is specified by the individual action plan. Many experts from civil society are complaining that a lot of issues are not undergoing as it should be, it must be. And you refer, for example, of defense reform, but that is definitely not on the agenda of debates, or on the agenda of leadership, on doing very important issues like security sector reform, like adopting the national security strategy, military strategy, and so on and so on. So, we see, I would say, the part of the care in this action plan individual. But I would like also to see the part of the stick. It's time to maybe to get to some enforced assistance, enforced consultancy on leadership, to do something that Moldovan leadership is assumed ourselves. And this is one question. Second question, there's very interesting developments right now in Europe as a consequences and collateral damage effects of the issues on Maghreb. All of this Libya situation, Tripoli, Syria, and so on and so on. We see how some issues, fundamental issues in Europe, like Schengen agreement or might be another agreements, are today debating in some details, for example, on border control inside the Europe. How can you see the NATO role on tackling this definitely security issue inside NATO, and also in the partnership area? Thank you, sir.
You have 3 questions.
Okay. I'll start with the first one, which was on missile defense. It took me a moment to get into it because I was switching around this thing here. But I realized it was on missile defense and how the Russian Federation would react to it and could react to it. And if I was not mistaken, I also understood you were referring to Romania in it. Okay. So, as you know, the projects for missile defense have undergone some evolution. There was first some plans relating to Poland and the Czech Republic. We are now in what we call the phased adapted approach, which would involve land-based, but also very much flexible ship-based elements. And so what you refer to is only part of a much wider picture. So the story in Lisbon was that many of us, including the Americans, but not just the Americans, decided that it would be in all of our strategic interest to try to do this project in cooperation with Russia. I have said where the Russian misgivings are, But I think also the Russians realized that it would be in their interest to at least try to have cooperation on this. Because none of us knows where possible risks and threats in the future may come from. It's no secret that the NATO allies were discussing the particular situation vis-à-vis Iran when they discussed that. It's not part of our communique, but that was part of the debate at that time. So we have not written it down. But the Russians would perhaps not subscribe to that view 100%, but also Russia does realize there may be potential problems in the future. So I think they do realize that the concept of a missile defense, which is nothing else than protecting your territory and your population, and that's what we're talking about. This is different from theater missile defense, which we have had before, which was just to protect your troops in the field. This is about protecting your territory and your population. So, is that of interest to the member states of NATO and Russia alike? I think it is. And I think on that basis, both NATO and Russia decided we want to try. So as I indicated in the beginning of my speech, we just started that. We have discussing with the Russians since a few months only. You know that the Russians were asking for what they call legal guarantees that a missile defense capability of NATO and the Americans, and that's what they're most interested in, would not challenge their own nuclear arsenal. And that's what they call strategic stability. That is the main concern which the Russians have. As I can see it, I think legal guarantees as such will probably be difficult because the Americans always have to look at what they have to do vis-à-vis ratification in the Senate. And you know how difficult the debate was on the New START treaty because there were different interpretations accompanying the START treaty on what that could mean for the project of missile defense. And for the Americans, that already at that time was a difficult debate because they were afraid that they would not be able to get the New START treaty through the Senate. So it's a complex undertaking. This guarantees, let's call it perhaps reassurances, because that perhaps will bring us on another road, on another trajectory. But my main point is we have only started that. I think it's still in the interest of both NATO and the Russians to try to come to some kind of agreement on it. So I'm still optimistic that we will be able to do so. How quickly we will be able to do that, I don't know. And I don't think it's a matter of weeks or months. Whenever we have a chance to come to some agreement, we should take it. But on the other hand, I think that's very much also a Russian view. They would not want to sign something speedily if they don't think it satisfies their needs. And on that basis, I think both sides will probably take the time which is necessary. So we are still engaged in that endeavor. And as I said, I'm an optimist because the security interests of both NATO and Russia in the end do come together here. That's my firm conviction. On the question related to the cooperation between NATO and Moldova, from the gentleman in the front, from the documentation center or information center, you mentioned the issue of defense reform. You will understand that I can't give you a readout of my meetings here, but let me only say that the issue of the national security strategy and the defense review, the strategic defense review, were very much on my mind and very much part of the conversations I've had, because I believe defense reform needs three things. One is strategic guidance. You need a strategic document to guide your defense reform. Secondly, you need political support. So I think it's up to the Parliament and up to the parties to make sure that they get those papers through Parliament, because otherwise what meaning do they have? And last but not least, I think the issue is an issue of resources. So I have engaged on those issues, and I hope you will understand that I'm not going to say more on meetings which I've had in the privacy of offices. On the Maghreb situation, you refer to, and it is difficult for me to come into that issue, but I will try, because as you know, we are not in border control and Schengen. Schengen is a matter of the European Union. All of you will have noticed the little public debates between some of the member states, in particular those around the Mediterranean, but also one other situation which happened in the north of my country, on the border between Germany and Denmark. There were some public debate in Denmark on the validity of border controls under the Schengen Agreement. So I will not go into that, but you refer to the situation in North Africa, and I could say the Middle East as a whole. Does that have an impact for us? Yes, I think it does. All of us are feeling the impact, whether it's being the refugees or whether it's being security situations, etc. We can't close our eyes that there are momentous changes taking place. We offered those countries which are undergoing transition to help and support them in areas where we have expertise, and this is essentially the security and defense sector. We can't do as much as the United Nations or the European Union could do, but we always said we are ready to support in areas where we can do so. Right now, the focus, as you can imagine, in NATO's debate is related to our action over Libya. That is the immediate situation we are under. It's not that we were in search of a new mission, because in 3-4 years, maybe the Afghanistan mission will be less relevant. We were not in a mad rush to find another mission for ourselves. But when the United Nations Security Council passed resolution 1973, I think it was clear to most everybody that that would either mean a group of nations, basically referring to member states of the alliance, or the alliance as such. As the alliance as such was not yet done with its own internal discussions, in the beginning it was a group of member states and others, because there were also Arab states involved. And then after some time, people decided this should be done by, how should I put it, by the tested structures of control and command which NATO provides. We are taking this job very seriously. One of our main tasks there is to make sure that we avoid as much as possible what is usually called civilian casualties. We do that job with a lot of diligence, and I can tell you we do that to a degree that sometimes the Libyan opposition would argue vis-à-vis us, but also vis-à-vis the media, why is NATO so hesitant? But our job is to protect civilian population, so when we sometimes hear there are tanks in certain streets of Misrata, I'm sure that some of the opposition would like us to take out those tanks, but we need to make sure that in the houses next to the tanks there are no civilians which will be suffering when we attack a tank in the street. The Libyan regime has noticed that NATO is working very carefully, and so they have adapted their strategies to that. So it has made us a bit harder for us to find the targets which we can hit without running the risk of civilian casualties. They do know that we work under certain limitations. And by the way, a major limitation is that all we do from the air. But we have been working very hard to realize, and after some time you're riding high on the learning curve, where the ammunition depots, for example, when they said they would leave Misrata, they came back 2 days later,